Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraph, and for the next half hour we're going to be exploring hand reading. Our guest is Richard Unger. He is the director of the Institute of Hand Analysis. He's been reading hands for almost 17 years and has read some 27,000 pair of hands. Richard Unger is the editor of the Hand Analysis Journal. When we say hand analysis or hand reading, what are we really talking about? What is it?
Well, I can tell you the type of hand reading that I do and that my students do, my colleagues do. And we look at hands and we see how a person behaves and why they behave that way, the underpinnings of that behavior, and also what their life purpose is, what they have come to do, what their lessons are in this lifetime, what they have charted out for themselves. And we take a look at how the current circumstances of events and behavior are part of that overall fabric.
How do you get to be a hand reader?
Well, I know how some people are getting to be a hand reader. They're taking courses with me, and they're getting to be a hand reader a lot easier than I did, since I learned mostly in a vacuum by myself. I started just by picking up a book and trying it out on some people I was meeting. I was traveling across country at the time, and I just picked up a $1 book someplace, and I thought it would be a fun thing to do with new people I was meeting, icebreaker type of thing. And it worked too often for what I expected. It didn't always work, but I tried different things out, and darn, it was accurate a few times. And I got intrigued real fast and picked up other books when I came back home, got as many books out of the library as I could find on it, and wrote away and got hard to get books and talked about it every day, practiced on people and listened to what they said, told them what the books said this would mean. If the books were accurate, this would mean this about you. And they'd say things like, well, I could see a little bit of that, but not this part. And I have a really good memory, and I would do this with a lot of people, and I started to catch on as to what the book said that did work and what didn't work, until eventually pieced together my own system for reading hands. And lots of practice, reading lots of hands. That's how I learned how to do it.
When you say it works, you're not talking about, I see a long journey in your future, or a tall, dark stranger, or you will inherit a fantastic sum of money.
That's what I saw in your hands, Charlie. Fantastic sums of money. No, just kidding. I don't do any predicting. I know in Eastern palmistry, the predictive element is a dominant theme. In India, they'll look at your hands, and palmistry is very popular in India, by the way, and they will look at your hands and tell you what will happen at 23, 27, you'll be married, then you'll have 2 kids, the first one will die, then you'll get the money, and then this will happen. And that it fits in with a worldview that includes, if you're born as an untouchable, you shouldn't do much about it and just take your lot. In America, that's considered wimping out. You're supposed to take destiny by your own hands. And so I look at palmistry very differently, and I don't consider the predictive element to be viable. So since I don't believe in it, I don't see those type of things in hands, and that type of stuff is 1800s palmistry as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about being right, and earlier before we began the discussion, you looked at my hands and you said you're a strong-willed individual. Wouldn't almost everyone agree to that if you told them that they were strong-willed?
You know, this is interesting because I get that question a lot, and I tell people that they eat raccoon meat for breakfast, and they say, oh, well, couldn't you say that for everybody? And I understand why people would make that statement, and yet if you sat next to me and watched me read the next 100 hands, I'll tell 3 other people that they're strong-willed. And so, sure, people are strong-willed. Sure, people are emotional this way, and sure, people are that way. And when I'm doing a class, for instance, I'll say, when I'm reading this person, you'll notice that everything I talk about, you can identify with to some degree. It's just that I'll talk to 100 people before I see another 1 or 2 that are as strong-willed as you are. And you're in some ways strong-willed, some ways not. And if we had talked longer, I would have told you more about it. You're kind of strong-minded. What you can understand, you put a lot of energy behind. That which you're not clear on, or that you don't understand, you don't apply your will to. But once you understand where you're going and believe in where you're going, I would not want to be between you and your destination.
Where does it come from? You said for you picked up a relatively inexpensive book the first time and wrote away for rare books sort of thing, but where does the tradition, and are there various branches of the tradition of hand reading?
Well, there is Eastern palmistry, and apparently, as far as we know, palmistry did get its start in India. as much as 10 or 12,000 years ago, although obviously it's obscure. In the United States, in English-speaking countries, there was a flurry of palmistry activity. England, the United States in the 1890s, and there were a bunch of books written in the 1890s, and they pretty much come from the same system of hand reading. They break hands down into 7 different categories, and they are determining whether a person is strong in this area, weak in that area. Hopefully they can help them pick the right types of jobs and professions to move into. And a lot of this had its start in the 1830s in France, and a lot of the books I was reading were the ones from the 1890s in the English language. Most of the books in the 1900s did really nothing except change the wording of the 1890s material. And there are some newer things out in the last 5 or 10 years, and they look at it from a slightly different perspective based on a more modern approach, but very much so follow the same general guidelines that were set down in the 1800s. European 1800s is where Western palmistry really is based upon.
When we talk about palmistry, again, one of the stereotypes is the so-called lifeline, which comes from the area of your wrist up onto your hand, and you can tell if you're going to have a long and productive life or you're going to die a tragic death at a relatively early age. Does that have anything to do with your system and what it is that you're looking at?
No, and my system is very different than the one I just described, the European system that we've taken on. No, as a matter of fact, there is research done in England. A series of doctors got together and they went to the morgue, got out a bunch of dead hands, measured the lifeline, and compared it to the length of life, length of palm, proportion to fingers, blah, 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 and happily concluded, quote, unquote, that the length of the lifeline has nothing to do with length of life. I was wondering why they were so happily concluding that, because wouldn't that have been incredible if it actually turned out that you can look at the line and predict how long a person would live? Wow, wouldn't insurance companies be interested in that? It didn't turn out, which is not too surprising to me as a palmist. And they also concluded that from that, therefore, palmistry never works in any way, which was a strange conclusion of scientists, because they took one myth of what palmistry would be, proved it not to be true, therefore assumed that nothing else that any palmist could say can have any validity. And the lifeline does not indicate how long you live, but it is an indicator of your ability to find satisfaction with yourself, your ability to rest, put your feet up, smoke the victory cigar, and say, I've made it. And if you can't do that, if that wire is broken in your wiring mechanism, you would be more prone to various diseases, and you could possibly live a shorter life. But the lifeline itself is not indicating the length of your life. It's the example I gave is just one of the aspects, the dominant aspect of what the lifeline does show.
Are people very conscious of their hands?
Some people are. My wife is. A lot of people aren't. If they were more conscious of their hands, they wouldn't do some of the things with their hands that they know are just giving themselves completely away. People are much more conscious, for instance, of what's on their face than what they're doing with their hands. And if I were playing poker, for instance, I would deliberately not look at your face, but I would pay very close attention to what gestures you were doing, which fingers you were tapping, which fingers you were rubbing, and so forth. And people have learned, to some degree anyway, not necessarily successfully, to control their facial expressions, but very few people pay attention to what they do with their hands, and boom, there it is.
With all the fingerprinting that's going on in order to get a driver's license in California, they want you to stick your thumb on the ink pad, and in all kinds of other situations you are fingerprinted. Does that give you a tremendous database to work with in terms of analyzing hands?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I would say it is the key element in hand reading in the system that I use. And in the sessions I have with people, half of the session is based upon the fingerprint analysis. The fingerprints are built in prior to birth, and they are unalterable. The lines in your hand, the shape of your fingers, the proportion of the digits on each finger changes with time and can change quite dramatically in very short periods of time. But the original blueprint is unalterable. So far, nobody's been able to change their fingerprints. And what I'm doing is comparing that original printout with the dynamic, ever-changing set of lines. So when I'm sitting in if I'm standing, waiting online in the post office. Have you ever been waiting online in the post office? part of post office procedure.
Absolutely.
There they are. There are the the popular, the 10 most wanted. There are their fingerprints. Oh, I can take a look and see what was going on in these people's original blueprints. Take a look at their face, see what crime they committed. Just keep myself busy in the post office. Yeah, that I believe that the things that are going on now, mostly for identification purposes, there are computer programs now made to identify pattern minutia, the small little details of fingerprints. San Francisco is thinking of buying one, I think, right now. Other cities are using it for identification purposes. This is tremendous for hand analysis in the future when palmistry is a bit more accepted and not looked upon as the gypsy fortune-telling rip-off stuff. They will already have programs available for hand identification that will be able to be utilized in other ways.
How does the hand work? You mentioned that there are 7 things that you look at in the hand. Is any one of those enough, or is it a combination? If you only had the fingerprint to work with, is that enough to do a hand analysis?
Well, actually, I look at more than 7, but there aren't that many systems that a person needs to know to do a fine job in reading a hand. And if all I had were the backs of your hands, I would have a pretty clear picture of how you operated in the world. As a matter of fact, I was reading hands at a party several years ago, and somebody with a long pinky, kind of like you and me, wise guy type, clever type of fellow. Everybody was showing me their palms up hands, so he walked up and he showed me his palm down hands, typical clever behavior. And so I just read his hands that way. And there's so much information and it's duplicated in so many places. But I would hate to say that I could be able to read your hand without taking a look at the lines. Maybe some very vital piece of information is sitting there where your headline and fate line intersect. And since I've got, I can look at both sides of your hands, I'll look at everything.
Let's go back again. What are some of the basic components that you look at when you read someone's hands?
Okay. I look at a person's thumb. Thumb is very important. Thumb, we're different from other species on the planet because of our opposable thumb. As a matter of fact, some people say that's the biggest difference between us and other people, other beings on the planet. We might not even be as smart as whales, but we have an opposable thumb and they don't. We have visible technology. We shape and control. We dominate our environment. We get things under our thumb. When I'm looking at your opposable thumb, I want to see how opposable it is. People whose thumbs are more opposable are ones who like to shape a wider swath of reality in front of them. Company president type of thumbs are thumbs that are large thumbs with a nice opposability. They'll form a 90-degree angle to their fingers very easily. When they open their hand naturally, their thumb will make a 90-degree angle with their fingers. People whose thumbs stay in closer. Now, this is a posture. Your thumb posture can change if your mother walked in the room, if your business partner walked in the room. If I bring up the subject of sex, your thumb might go all the way in, it might go all the way out. But people whose thumbs are in more aren't as interested in controlling as wide a swath of reality in front of them. They're not interested in controlling their neighbor's yard. They'll take care of their own yard. So I want to look at your thumb to see how you shape and control your life, what use you make out of the tools that you have available, how you go about setting up your life. And what I do is I look at the different sections of your thumb and I want to see how big they are in proportion to each other. I want to see if one is long and another is short, if one area is wider than is proportionate for your hand shape. I want to see if the color is abnormal for your hand. I'm not looking for a specific color. I want to see what your hand color, what your natural hand color is, and I want to see if one part was colored different. I want to see which part of your hand was built different than the rest, as if the crew that was building your hand left for a lunch break. Some kids came and fooled around, and then when the real crew came back, it was too late. That stuff was marked on your hand. Because any part that was built disharmonious, not fitting in with the rest of the build, I will know that will be the area that you have the most difficulty handling. So I look at your thumb to see how you shape and control. I look at the fingers to see how you operate outwardly in the world, your personality, your character, your traits, the part of you that's visible to other people. And once again, I look for which parts were well built and which parts were poorly built. Without even being a tree expert, you can see some trees are, that's not a healthy tree. Now that's a healthy tree. And if you're a tree expert, you take a look at the leaves to see if they're pointy or round, they have 5 points and so forth, a bunch of different things that I would look for to see how healthy your different fingers were. And if there was a part that wasn't healthy, I would be able to translate from Palmese into English and tell you, well, that's the part of your life that is more problematic. I look at the lines on the hand. The lines are a nervous system imprint. If I severed the nerves between the hand and the brain, the lines would disappear. In various forms of paralysis, the disappearance of lines on the thumb and then the rest of the hand is the first physical symptom. So when
you talk about the lines on the thumb, are you talking? What can someone look that's listening right now? What can they look at their thumb to see lines? You talk about
lines. Well, if you look closely, you'll probably notice that there are horizontal and vertical lines on the thumb. I'm not talking about the fingerprint lines. On top of those, there is most likely on most hands, you'd find a whole series of horizontal and vertical ones.
Okay.
And their placement, whether there's more horizontals or verticals, whether the ones to the left were deeper or the ones to the right were deeper. I would be looking at that stuff and interpreting from my behavioral model. There you go. A couple of verticals in the left hand of the lower section of your thumb.
One of the questions that we like to ask is what kind of research, bona fide scientific research, has been done or is being done in this area to back it up?
Glad you asked me. Just happened to have with me here today a stack. This is a computer run that I did in 1981. This is a computer run I did in Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas, if you've been there, has a tremendous medical complex, tremendous medical libraries. And I was tired of reading the same palmistry books over and over again. And you ever find a topic you're real interested in and there's only 10 books on it? Palmistry, in effect, is like that. There are a couple hundred books, but there's essentially just about 10 or so books on palmistry. So I went to the medical library, and I was looking up hands, and mostly I was seeing hands taken apart for surgical purposes. Didn't like to look at that. And I caught the word dermatoglyphic someplace, dermatoskin glyphics carvings. And this is fingerprints. It is a hot research topic. This is the computer run for 10 years worth of dermatoglyphic research in that library alone. Okay. In other words, there are hundreds of articles coming out every year on fingerprints, and they don't call them that. They say dermatoglyphic research. A few months ago, USA Today had an article on Alzheimer's disease and fingerprints. Life magazine, Down syndrome and fingerprints. It's a hot research topic. Any month you open up the AMA journal, there's likely to be an article or two on fingerprint research and various genetic diseases, schizophrenia, heart attack, research, cancer research, autistic children, various behavioral disorders. And what they're looking at is they have a variety of things that they look at in the fingerprints, and they use to simplify it, they use a point system. And if you've got a bunch of this but not too much of that, then they compare that statistically, and they notice that, how about that? 86% of the people with Down syndrome have a lot of this, but not too much of that, whereas only 2% of the general population without Down syndrome would have that. This does not indicate that you have Down syndrome, but that's certainly very interesting. And to overgeneralize, that's the type of research that's being done. I have not read any research in the area of AIDS and fingerprint analysis, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's one or two teams working on that currently. And as I say, it is a very hot research topic.
Is there a current medical application? Obviously, there's a great interest. Would the goal be to say to certain people that if you have offspring, they have the likelihood of having thus or such disease? And
right now, it's excuse me.
That's it.
Right now, it's a diagnostic tool, a diagnostic aid. They wouldn't say, according to your fingerprints, that this means that. However, right now, what they've done, where hand analysis is being used in the medical profession, for instance, hand analysis now is the most acceptable means of determining whether or not twins came from the same egg or not, which seems very esoteric to some people, but is very important if you're going to have a kidney transplant. And the hand analysis technique that they use gives them best information there. If, for instance, they're using electron microscopes looking at developing fetuses while they're in the, there you are, you're a fetus, and they're already plunging things in there to take photographs of you. And if the test shows that you have an 80 times more likelihood than the general population to have lupus disease, this might warrant more intrusive type of testing. So this is how it is currently being done. And a lot of it is pure research. In other words, research without a specific goal in mind for a specific disease, but just to learn more about the imprinting technique of how the fingerprints get there and what we could know about the fetus from the fingerprints.
Any simple general realities that you could pass on to the listening audience? You've got a relatively wide, short, stubby fingered hand.
Hmm. Now, that's real dangerous. That's like saying, I've been coughing a lot, Doc. What does that mean? Well, you got an irritation somewhere in your throat, we can tell. Or maybe you're trying to get out of school early by coughing. It could mean so many different things. And palmistry is a combination of things. And that's one of the things that makes it hard in trying to learn palmistry from a palmistry book. It says if your thumb does this, it means that. Sure, it means that. If your pinky does this and your headline does that and your nails look like this, sure, under those circumstances, it means that. Let me see if I can give you one. Let's see. You can compare the size of your thumb compared to the next person's thumb proportionally for your hand. If you've got lots of thumb for your hand, if I was going to build your hand out of clay and I had to use a larger percentage of it to make your thumb than the next guy's, then you have more shape and controlness about you. You're more interested in controlling the events. And if your thumb is smaller, things more happen to you, and you kind of you go with them, accept them, or fight them, but you're more at the effect of things. The big thumb people make things happen.
Okay, sticking with that for a second, is there a way that you can modify your hands or the position of your hands to affect your life? You said earlier that if your thumb sticks out naturally at a 90-degree angle, that you're a kind of a controller, but if your thumb is naturally closer to your hand, you're more likely to have other people control you. Can you walk around and consciously hold your thumb at right angles to your hand and feel more powerful, be more powerful?
An insightful question. And yes, as a matter of fact, people will take different postures. What I just described about the thumb is a posture, and it will change during the day. While you're making an excuse on the telephone, you notice that your thumbs might be inside your fist in a thumb-sucking posture. When your business partner walks in and you're going to talk about this, this, and that, your thumb might be moving out. So I'll be jogging along, and I'll be noticing that let's say I'm halfway towards my goal today, and I'm starting to think thoughts like, halfway towards my goal, that's plenty for today. After all, it is hot, cold, dry, wet outside. Boy, oh boy, who would know anyway I only got half? That's plenty for today. And I might notice that I'm jogging along in a thumb-sucking posture. And then I might decide, I would really rather go all the way today. I know what I'll do. I'm going to jog for the next 100 yards with my thumb up in that, Fonzie thumbs up 90-degree angle posture. And pretty soon I'm starting to think, boy, it sure is warm today. A good day for running a long distance. I think I'll go a mile further than my goal. Now, I'm not saying that in every case that would be enough to change your thinking pattern. I mean, if somebody were about to shoot me, I'd probably still be scared no matter what I did with my hands. But then again, if I were looking for a job, I might tell a person, if you were looking for a job, I might say, take this posture, you'll present yourself better, feel better about yourself. And the posture in which you hold your hand not only would be an indicator of what type of things you're thinking at that time, but you can talk to your subconscious. Say, think this way. Maybe it'll agree with you.
Do our hands and our hand postures change over the course of our life, and if so, how?
They change in absolutely incredibly short periods of times, which was brought home to me very recently by a set of handprints taken by one of my students. She had taken a handprint of a policeman who shortly thereafter killed somebody. It was the only time he had ever done that, any time he had used his weapon in the line of duty. And he called the person up and said, take my handprints again, because I've just gone through the biggest changes I've ever gone through in my life, and I know my hands must have changed too. And here we have it, one set of handprints, another set 4 weeks later, with massive changes in the lines, the proportion of the fingers, and the overall shape of the hand. And this had taken place in 30 days, 4 weeks. In my own handprints, the closest I had seen that is more like 3 or 4 months. And here was one, boom, just that fast. Entire overall changes in the palm.
What about real tricky folks? Can they really fake you out with the left hand being considerably different than the right hand?
I have had some hands that are tricky to read, where in most cases the ones that trick me the most are the people who you can say what you see is not what you get with these people. And they'll have a persona that is so well developed that I'll start off reading that persona, but as I start tracking it down and start adding factors to it, all of a sudden I'm running into box canyons and it's not following through. And all of a sudden I'll get the feeling, hold it a second. I'm noticing that you act this way, and this way, but there's something, oh, I see now. And but then again, what I'm saying is, if I'm looking around at the whole hand and taking in enough information from areas, pretty soon the hands will start pointing me in the right direction.
There are a lot of people involved in palmistry and hand reading in this country in particular that are charlatans, that are really out there trying to make a buck telling you that you're going to discover the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Are there cultures where hand reading is held in higher esteem and where there is a deserved higher level of credibility?
As a matter of fact, pretty much all the cultures except the English-speaking cultures hold handwriting in much higher esteem. In India, of course, palmistry is held in very high esteem. I haven't been to a bunch of other cultures, but what I've read says that palmists are held in very high esteem quite a few places. And yes, there are charlatans. You know, there are lousy dentists. There are doctors I wouldn't want to bring my child to either. And with anything else, you know, if you're going to get your car fixed, you know, some mechanics will do a better job than others, and some are just a ripoff. And I don't know exactly what guideline a person can follow. How do you know when you go to a dentist that he's doing a good job? How do you know that you needed a left-handed root canal instead of a right-handed root canal? What would you know? Are you going to read a dentistry book to catch up? And we are, in many ways, just right out there, and we have to go by our instincts and ask our friends if it worked well for them and trust our own instincts to do right. And so it's tricky. There are people who have studied a little bit of hands and are clever and quick and quick. They size you up, how you're dressed, figure out by a little conversation what it is you want to hear, and then hand it back to you for as much as you're willing to pay for it. There are people like that.
Are there things we should teach our children about their hands, their attitude toward their hands, the posture of their hands that will help them, if it may be a little late for some of us? Or is it something that's just going to happen regardless of their attitude toward their hands?
Well, I wouldn't say that there's that much that we can teach our children regarding their hands. Although I would say it's very valuable to look at children's hands. I have a girl who's going to be 8 next month, and we have a whole sequence of her handprints. And my oldest handprint is back. The one that I have is 1970. I really wish I had a handprint from before that happened in my life and before that happened in my life. But I have no way of knowing for sure whether my headline did this then or did that then. But with my daughter, we certainly do, and it's given us quite a few clues as to her behavior before the manifestation was clear in terms of her behavior. We were already clued in from what was going on in her hands.
What does the future hold for hand reading? What are some of the wonderful things that humanity might benefit?
Well, the future of hand reading is very bright in that hand reading I see is in its infancy. Because of its non-acceptance in the public eye right now, as the general public starts to let go of the old image of palmistry, computer time will be made available, legitimate research people will go to work on it, and depending upon the area that you wish to use it, palmistry, I believe, is going to have a strong impact in the therapeutic community because it's particularly adept at pinpointing people's main issue before the person has even opened their mouth to the therapist. The therapist would have a model to go by. Also, it is wide open for medical uses, as I was just talking about before. It's also being pursued in the area of self-awareness in the metaphysical type communities, and this is the area that is being most used now. And in business, palmistry has a tremendous value to offer. Taking a look at the selection techniques of various companies, wouldn't it be useful to know that this person operates under this circumstance this way? I know there's heavy-duty psychological testing for job placement and who should be the vice president of this company. And I think hand analysis will be an acceptable part of that, not the whole thing, but an acceptable part of that once the stigma of palmistry is taken off. Think of this type of study to be done. Let's say you took the handprints of 1,500 people, just like what Nielsen does, 1,500 standard people of, okay, here are people who were blind at birth, and here are people who got blinded as a child and blinded as an adult. I wonder what the computer would pump out about what statistically shows up as a difference between them. People who attended this school or people who attended that school. How about Procter & Gamble? People who didn't buy my product, people who bought my product and stopped. I'd be interested to see if the computer says that 40% of them have long pinkies. Well, that's it.